In 1932, a study began in the rural heart of Macon County, Alabama, that would leave a permanent scar on the history of American medicine. This study, officially called the Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male, was conducted by the United States Public Health Service, or PHS. It involved a partnership with the Tuskegee Institute, which was a respected center for black education at the time. The goal was to observe the full, natural progression of syphilis when it was left completely untreated. The researchers wanted to track the disease from its initial infection to the final, devastating stages, believing that this information would be scientifically valuable. They chose this specific location because of its large, poor, and isolated African American population, many of whom were sharecroppers with limited access to education or healthcare. The study recruited a total of 600 African American men. Among them, 399 had already contracted syphilis before the study began, while the remaining 201 men did not have the disease and served as a control group for comparison. The men were not told the true purpose of the research. Instead, they were lured into participating with promises of free medical care from the government. They were told they were being treated for bad blood, which was a common local term used to describe a wide range of ailments, from syphilis and anemia to general fatigue. This vague and deceptive language was purposefully used to obscure the study's real, non-therapeutic intentions and to gain the men's trust under false pretenses. The men who participated were offered incentives that seemed incredibly generous for the time and place. These included media group, vintage photo of African American men receiving physical examinations, archival images of medical checkups in rural clinics at stock at distribute_equally, free physical examinations, free rides to and from the clinics, hot meals on examination days, and even free burial insurance to cover funeral expenses. For poor sharecroppers struggling through the Great Depression, these offerings were very difficult to refuse. The promise of free healthcare from government doctors gave the study an air of legitimacy and authority. The men believed they were finally receiving the medical attention they had long been denied, not realizing they were subjects in an experiment designed to watch them suffer and die without intervention. The foundational ethical problem with the study was the complete absence of informed consent. The men never knew they had syphilis, nor did they understand that the study's primary goal was observation, not treatment. The procedures they underwent, including painful and dangerous spinal taps, were presented as special treatments rather than diagnostic tools for the researchers. The men were led to believe that these procedures were part of their therapy for bad blood. This fundamental deception meant that the participants could not make a free and informed decision about whether to join the study, a violation that sits at the very core of why this chapter in medical history is so dark and disturbing. For 4 long decades, from 1932 until 1972, the Tuskegee Syphilis Study continued its unethical course, actively preventing the participants from receiving effective treatment. The most glaring example of this deception occurred in the mid-1940s, when penicillin became widely available and was established as the standard, effective cure for syphilis. Even with a safe and simple cure at hand, the researchers deliberately withheld it from the men in the study. They went to extraordinary lengths to ensure the men remained untreated, viewing their deteriorating health as valuable data. The PHS researchers even provided local doctors in Macon County with a list of the participants, instructing them not to treat these men for syphilis. This deliberate withholding of a known cure had devastating and predictable consequences for the men and their families. The human cost was staggering. As the years went on, the men suffered the terrible long-term effects of untreated syphilis, including blindness, deafness, severe mental health problems, heart disease, and bone deterioration. By the time the study was finally exposed and halted, it was estimated that 128 of the participants had died either directly from syphilis or from its related complications. The researchers had watched, documented, and analyzed their decline, all while a simple cure was readily available to the rest of the world. The tragedy did not end with the men who were enrolled in the study. The disease spread through their families, creating a second generation of victims who had no connection to the research itself. Because the men were never told they had a contagious venereal disease, many unknowingly infected their wives. It is estimated that at least 40 of the participants' wives contracted syphilis. Furthermore, the cycle of suffering continued into a third generation, as 19 children were born with congenital syphilis, a condition passed from an infected mother to her baby during pregnancy. These children entered the world already burdened by a disease that was entirely preventable. The exploitation of these men was rooted in their vulnerability. They were poor, they had limited education, and they were members of a racial minority group that faced systemic discrimination. The researchers took advantage of their trust in the government and their desperate need for medical care. The men were treated not as human patients deserving of care, but as mere subjects in a long-term laboratory experiment. The study's design prioritized the collection of scientific data over the preservation of human life and dignity, creating a legacy of harm that would extend far beyond the men who were originally enrolled in the flawed and immoral project. The Tuskegee Syphilis Study continued in the shadows for 40 years, operating with the knowledge and approval of numerous health officials. However, its existence was not a complete secret within the medical community. Over the years, a few individuals raised concerns, but their objections were consistently ignored or dismissed by those in charge. The person who finally brought the study to a halt was a PHS epidemiologist and whistleblower named Peter Buxton. He had first learned of the study in the 1960s and was morally outraged. He believed it was completely unethical to withhold treatment from the men, especially after penicillin had become the standard cure for syphilis. Buxton first voiced his concerns to his superiors at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the successor to the PHS. His protests were overruled. He was told that the study had to continue until all the original subjects had died and been autopsied in order to complete the data set. Unwilling to accept this answer, Buxton decided to take a drastic step. In 1972, he leaked the story to a journalist friend, Gene Heller, of the Associated Press. Heller investigated his claims, confirmed the horrifying details, and broke the story to the public on July 25, 1972. The news was met with immediate and widespread shock and outrage from the American public. The public outcry was so intense that the United States Department of Health, Education, and Welfare was forced to act swiftly. An ad hoc advisory panel was formed to investigate the study. Comprised of medical professionals, lawyers, and ethicists, the panel reviewed the history and conduct of the research. Their conclusion was clear and damning. The Tuskegee study was ethically unjustified, and they recommended its immediate termination. Less than 4 months after the story broke on November 16, 1972, the study was officially ended. The remaining survivors were finally told the truth and offered medical treatment for their disease. The end of the study marked the beginning of a long process of reckoning with what had happened. In 1973, a class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of the study participants and their families. The following year, the United States government reached an out-of-court settlement of $10 million. Under the terms of the settlement, the living participants with syphilis each received $37,500, while the heirs of those who had died received $15,000. In addition, the government promised to provide lifetime medical benefits and burial services to all living participants, both the syphilitic group and the control group, as well as to their wives, widows, and children affected by the study. The exposure of the Tuskegee Syphilis Study sent shockwaves through the nation and led to profound and lasting changes in how research involving human subjects is conducted. Congress quickly passed new laws to protect people who participate in clinical studies. The most significant outcome was the 1979 Belmont Report, a landmark document that established the 3 core ethical principles for all human subject research: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. These principles now form the foundation of modern research ethics. Respect for persons requires informed consent, beneficence requires minimizing harm and maximizing benefits, and justice requires the fair distribution of the burdens and benefits of research. To enforce these new regulations, the federal government mandated the creation of institutional review boards, or IRBs. These committees are now required at any institution, such as a university or hospital, that receives federal funding for research. The job of an IRB is to review and approve all research plans before they can begin, ensuring that the study is ethically sound and that the rights and welfare of the participants are fully protected. The creation of IRBs was a direct response to the failures of oversight that allowed the Tuskegee study to continue for so long, creating a system of checks and balances to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. Decades after the study ended, the United States government made a formal gesture of reconciliation. On May 16, 1997, President Bill Clinton held a ceremony at the White House, attended by 5 of the study's elderly survivors. He issued a formal public apology on behalf of the nation. He stated, "What was done cannot be undone. But we can end the silence. We can stop turning our heads away. We can look at you in the eye and finally say on behalf of the American people, what the United States government did was shameful, and I am sorry." This apology was a crucial step in acknowledging the profound wrong that had been committed. Even with these reforms and apologies, the legacy of the Tuskegee study continues to cast a long shadow, particularly over the relationship between the African American community and the medical establishment. The study created a deep and enduring sense of mistrust in doctors, hospitals, and public health initiatives. This history is often cited as a reason for health disparities and for hesitation in participating in clinical trials or accepting medical advice, including vaccinations. The story of Tuskegee serves as a powerful and painful reminder of the devastating consequences of racism in medicine and the absolute importance of upholding ethical principles to protect the most vulnerable among us.